Well, hello everyone. It's an honour to be here presenting today on the risks and benefits of social media on the mental health of adolescents. My name is Dr. Jon Goldin. I'm a consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist on an inpatient unit called MCU, Mildred Creek Unit, at Great Ormond Street Hospital in London. So a little overview of what I'm going to be talking to you about. So I'm going to be talking about some of the background context to the widespread use of social media amongst adolescents, the prevalence of it. I'm going to give some clinical examples. I'm going to talk about deliberate self-harm and eating disorders, particularly anorexia nervosa. I'm going to talk a little bit about safeguarding issues, child protection issues, and I also want to discuss possible solutions and positive examples before we conclude. Now, I'm sure this picture looks quite familiar to many of you. A teenager on their phone, wired in with headphones. Young people spend long periods of time on their phones, and I think particularly as parents, perhaps we're very familiar with this as well as clinicians. They use a whole wide range of apps and social media sites. Instagram and Snapchat seem to be two of the most popular amongst teenagers in the UK, but there's also Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, a whole range of other ones. TikTok is increasingly popular. Many, many millions of people use it across the globe. This is a somewhat comical picture of a family scene, but not entirely unfamiliar, and sometimes everyone in the family is on there looking at their screen rather than actually looking at each other and talking to each other, which can be a shame when that happens. It's quite an egotistical thing, social media. It's really about me in many ways, and this slide talks about the ego-system rather than the ecosystem. It can make one somewhat self-centered, and one needs to kind of guard against that, perhaps. So why do children use social media? They use it for communication, they use it to boost their self-esteem, getting likes, getting positive feedback from others. Of course, that doesn't always happen, and when they don't get that, that can cause problems. They use it for self-expression, to boost their confidence, to be more popular amongst their peers. They use it for entertainment. They're often watching videos or GIFs or memes or brief things that entertain them. And they also have a sense of belonging by being in a kind of group with other young people on particular social media sites. And this is very important, as we know, for adolescents. And of course, it can be used to keep up and receive information, as it's being increasingly used in the last few years. So how long are children spending online? This is a survey, really, not a huge survey, but from the RCPCH, Royal College of Pediatricians and Child Health. And they, age 11 to 24 children and young adults, and they told us that in a typical day they spend an average of 2.5 hours on a computer, laptop or tablet, 3 hours on their phone and 2 hours watching TV. So that is 7.5 hours screen time per day. And if you think that they're probably sleeping for maybe 8 hours a day, 7.5 out of 16 hours screen time on average of waking time. These are some of the trends in social media at the moment. Instagram is certainly very popular and has large user numbers. Snapchat, young people say that the whole point is that you can say what you want and then it's gone. So this can promote sometimes bullying and unpleasant interactions because people think it's going to disappear. Of course, you can screenshot the interaction so it doesn't always disappear. TikTok is hugely popular. I think there are billions of users nowadays across the globe. And it's become especially popular during the COVID lockdown, perhaps, as a site where people can share videos, get entertainment. But there is a dark side to TikTok as well that I'll come on to talk a little bit about. Twitter, I'm quite active on Twitter. And, you know, you can share photos, videos, you can message people. Perhaps it's the best of them all in one place, some people might say. Facebook, young people tend to see it as uncool. It's pointless, one person said. It's for old people. So teenagers are less on Facebook in my experience. WhatsApp is a good way of communicating in groups, sometimes with family members. There's end-to-end encryption. Sometimes there are unsavory groups that use it that don't want their messages to be intercepted. Sadly, you know, for example, paedophile groups, that kind of thing. YouTube is a good way of accessing videos, particularly. And there's this jargon that young people use: streaks, deep likes, ghosting. A deep like is, for example, when you like a post sort of maybe more than 24 hours after it, that's a deep like, and that's very uncool. If you're going to respond to a post, you need to respond to it quickly. So that sort of makes one feel that one needs to be on one's phone, keeping an eye on things all the time. Emojis, we all use them sometimes in communication. One young person said more than 3 are seen as a little immature nowadays, so don't put more than 3 emojis in a row if you can avoid it. And one 17-year-old girl said social media is a blessing and a curse, and I think that's quite a good summary. It's got its pros and cons for sure. So smartphones only came in about 2007. That was the first iPhone. So about 14 years ago. It feels like they've been around forever. And there has been an increase in prevalence of depression and anxiety in young people over the last 10 years. Young people with mental health problems we know may be more vulnerable to the harmful effects of social media, and this is sometimes referred to as the digital divide that can exist, with some people being more susceptible to the issues and difficulties of social media and others more resilient and able to manage it well. One large study in the UK in 2017, it was the NHS digital study that's widely quoted in the UK, said that in 2020, 1 in 6 children aged 5 to 16-year-olds were identified as having a probable mental disorder. That's a significant increase from 1 in 9 in 2017. So we do know that rates of probable mental disorders have really significantly increased. There are about 3.6 billion social media users in the world, nearly half the world's population. That's probably even gone up since I found that statistic. So most people don't go more than an hour without checking their phones. And young people are particularly affected, with nearly half of young people in the West spending 10 hours a day online. And Anne Longfield is the Children's Commissioner who actually retired from her post around February this year, but she said she was a very powerful advocate in the UK for young people's rights and the mental health of young people, and she said that children will be angry looking back at the wild and dangerous online world that they were exposed to. So we haven't really regulated things as much as we should have done, and we haven't protected young people in the way that we should have done, and we need to improve this going forwards. This is something about the dangers of the web. Many young people see things that they find disturbing on the internet. They don't always talk to adults about that. Nearly 2/3 of young people have met someone offline that they'd contacted online without their parents' knowledge, which obviously can be extremely dangerous, sometimes with adults pretending to be young people and then arranging to meet up, and then very concerning things happening when they do meet up. Individuals with a history of self-harm are more likely to be groomed by paedophiles and meet up with paedophiles in person. So again, it's about the young people who are particularly vulnerable with mental health difficulties are susceptible to particular concerning challenges when they're online. There are many suicide sites and social media sites that have users that promote suicide and the most effective ways to commit suicide. Saying things like how painful it is, how long will it take one to die. There's one site I came across which sort of talks about whether you want to catch the bus or not, and you meet other people waiting at a sort of metaphorical bus stop, and catching the bus is committing suicide, and some people will encourage other people, maybe that they've never met, but online, to catch the bus, which is clearly very worrying. And there was a very significant event in the UK when Molly Russell, a teenager, died, and she was clearly influenced. She committed suicide. She was clearly influenced by all the graphic self-harm images that she saw on Instagram, and Instagram announced that it would ban these images in February 2019. They've partially done that. They haven't been as successful as perhaps they should have been at doing that. Children don't always tell their parents if they're upset by something online. I think they're kind of worried maybe that their parents will take their phone away, for example. So they're often suffering in silence. And they're much more likely, for example, to tell adults, for example, their teacher, if something upsetting face-to-face happens. Whereas if it's upset them, something that's happened online, they're less likely to turn to adults for help. So children are suffering in silence. And as I say, there is a significant increase in depression, anxiety, self-harm, eating disorders amongst young people globally. We've seen in the UK a very significant increase in these things, particularly eating disorders during the pandemic. And there's a significant increase in CAMS referrals over the last 5 years. So CAMS are Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services. That's how we describe our services in the UK. And these services are really getting swamped and overwhelmed. And that's been an increasing issue over the last few years, sadly. Now, however, I've talked a lot about sort of correlation between increasing mental health difficulties amongst young people and increasingly widespread use of social media, but we can't confuse correlation with causation. There's currently no specific evidence from neuroscience studies that typical internet use harms the adolescent brain. And in terms of social interaction and empathy, adolescents' use of social media can sometimes enhance existing friendships. That's for some people more than others, but there can be positives. And there was a study in the BMJ a few years ago which said that if social media is used to avoid social difficulties, there's reduced well-being. But if it's used to deal with social challenges, outcomes can improve. So really, there are some advantages as well of access to the internet and the social media. We need to help our young people learn to access the online space thoughtfully, responsibly. As one young person said, you can keep up to date with friends who you don't always see via social media, which is one of the positives. And of course, you can learn a lot about the world around you, current affairs, etc., through social media. So there's definite positives as well that we shouldn't forget. In terms of some of the disadvantages, I've already touched on cyberbullying, but people will say a lot more behind a computer screen than they would in real life. That's what one teenager said, and that's certainly been my clinical experience, that young people will be more prone to insults, accusations, racism, homophobia, etc., online rather than face-to-face. There is a lot of age-inappropriate content, and there's a big issue about young people, sometimes as young as 7, 8, 9, accessing quite hardcore pornography, for example, online, that really is inappropriate for them and influencing them in a negative way. Location services, it's very important for parents and adults to inform their children and young people that they work with and are responsible for about location services, because if you have your location service on and you're interacting with someone and you don't necessarily know who they are, they can tell where you are and they could potentially cause you harm if they come and find you. I've alluded already to grooming and child protection issues, which is very significant, and there's a lot of inappropriate content, for example, pro-anorexic websites and how to kill yourself websites, etc. This is one study or survey of over 1,000 young people by a UK charity, Girl Guiding, and it describes the kind of worries that teenage girls are particularly concerned about. They worry about this sort of quest to create an image of a perfect life on social media. I think we all do it. We put the positives of our lives on social media. But this means that the expectations can be quite high, particularly for teenagers. Perhaps particularly girls are susceptible to this more than boys, although boys are also very susceptible to it, feeling that their lives don't match up to the perfect lives that they're seeing out there and the perfect images that they're seeing out there. Girls are particularly worried about how photos can be altered, how they're worried about how they look in photos. Of course, many photos that are posted online are photoshopped or altered in some way and made to look different to how we all look in real life. And for girls, teenage girls particularly, that can be a real challenge. Their sense of self-esteem can be bound to the number of likes received. And of course, filters and photo editing are widespread, as I've mentioned. And there is an argument that when they're published in the media, in magazines and online and so on, that there should actually be a sort of kite mark saying that this photo has been altered, rather than pretending that it's just a natural photo. I'm sure we've all heard of sad cases of cyberbullying where private images get widely circulated. There can be public shame and humiliation. This has sadly led to suicides. I'm sure we can think of examples of that, which have been very tragic. There was a very big study of 10,000 teenagers not so long ago by my colleagues at UCL in London and Imperial College, which showed that social media damages children's mental health, particularly by ruining sleep, reducing their exercise levels, and exposing them to cyberbullies in their homes. If you were bullied in the past at school, at the end of the school day, you could get away from it and have a bit of peace. However, over the last 10 to 15 years, cyberbullies can potentially reach you, in your bedroom. And if you've got your phone next to your bed at night and someone's pinging you with messages, and then you look at them and then it's bullying, nasty messages, obviously that's going to upset you. It's going to interfere with your sleep. You're not going to sleep well. That's going to be detrimental to your mental health. So I very frequently suggest to parents that they make sure that their young person keeps the smartphone out of the bedroom at night. And parents need to model that as well. So perhaps the whole family can say that we're charging our phones in the bedroom at night. We're charging our phones in the kitchen rather than it being in the bedroom at night. And also we strongly recommend that young people don't look at social media or phones for the hour before bedtime. The research suggests that that's good advice. So sleep deprivation is a significant issue, as I've already mentioned. Deliberate self-harm is a big issue. People post images on Instagram and elsewhere of self-harm. Sometimes it can glamorize things. Sometimes a young person who is prone to self-harm can feel sort of a sense of belonging and feeling understood by other people that post about it. But there can also be a kind of competition between peers, and the more you self-harm, it becomes a kind of badge of honor. Anorexia nervosa is a big issue as well, with competition and tips online about how to be a better anorexic. And of course, there are some helpful websites that are out there as well. Beat is one helpful website in the UK. There are these pro-ana websites which sort of promote anorexia, and someone has written, and the spelling mistake there is deliberate. I found that online. Please somebody be my Anna buddy. In other words, please can someone support me to be better at having anorexia and, to help me not eat, this kind of thing. It's very sad that this is online, but this is sadly very, very widespread. We should try and take these websites down perhaps, but it's impossible to fully control it. So really education is a key thing, and we as professionals need to be more aware of all this, and I hope this talk is part of contributing to increased awareness about what is out there online and that young people are exposed to. There are recovery websites as well, some of which are very useful, sort of stories of hope and showing that you can recover from eating disorders. Some of them are somewhat over the top. That quote, for example, in my last bullet point there. Just talking about safeguarding pornography, young people are exposed to inappropriate, indecent images very often. It's very easy for an adult paedophile to pretend they're someone they're not, preying on vulnerable children. OnlyFans, there's been a big issue in the UK, and BBC did an investigation a couple of months ago about underage girls faking their ages to then post explicit content online. So one girl aged 12 or 13 used her grandmother's passport. The checks were not very careful. OnlyFans suggested that this young girl was an adult. She posted explicit content which obviously attracted paedophiles. And of course, young people who are trafficked or abused sadly often end up on these websites. So we really need to be regulating it much more carefully. Sexting is very widely used as well, a sort of flirting ritual for young people, where people text naked images, for example. And many girls that I've spoken to, teenage girls, sometimes feel under pressure from their boyfriends or from boys at their school or that they know to share what is called nudes, share naked images of themselves. If you really love me, you'd send me a picture of yourself naked, but then the boy may perhaps share that with, dozens of other boys. And it's very humiliating for the girl, obviously. And there is an issue of rape culture that's been increasingly talked about in the UK this year. And if you look up Google, Everyone's Invited, this is an online platform, and there's thousands of harrowing anonymous testimonies about widespread sexual violence, particularly at parties. So, have a look at that. It's pretty alarming, to put it mildly. We do need to help young people address the risk through open discussion and education, and we as adults need to educate ourselves. Social media companies make their sites as addictive as possible. Again, you can Google things like dopamine labs, swipe down. The aim is to sort of make apps as addictive as possible. And The Social Dilemma on Netflix is a film that is really, really worth watching if you're interested in this area. In terms of possible solutions, I think if we have more family-friendly filters on devices, that can be a potential solution. But young people often know more than adults about disabling these. I think education is crucial. Children in the UK, via the national curriculum, are being taught about internet safety in a safe, sensible age-appropriate way, but that needs to be done more widely across the globe as well. Parents need to try to view the world through their child's eyes. Website providers need to police their sites more closely, and there does need to be a better legal framework. I'm going to mention that in a minute. Parents need to maintain certain boundaries, and there are sites such as ourpact.com that can help with that. And if a young person searches under depression or self-harm, they should be guided to counselling and resources that can offer support. Sometimes, sadly, they're guided to sites that I've already discussed, which might encourage them to self-harm. So that should not be happening. So in the UK, where the government are taking this pretty seriously, and there's been an online safety bill earlier this year, which makes companies more responsible for their users' safety online. There's been a lot of work over the last 10 years leading up to this, and finally legislation is starting to happen. But the idea is that social media companies are responsible for removing and limiting the spread of illegal and harmful content, child sexual abuse type content, suicide content. And I think these sites, and I'm often quoted in the media as talking about this, that, you know, these social media companies need to be moving the mental health of young people higher up their priority list. Their priority is making money and having more and more users, but they often do that at the expense of young people's mental health. So the way they're going to change is if they're hit in the pocket, as it were, if they're actually fined for not regulating their sites carefully enough. And Ofcom now has the power to fine companies, will have the power soon, hopefully. A new duty of care that these companies have to fine them up to 10% of their annual global turnover. So these companies are worth billions and billions of pounds. So finding them a significant percentage of their turnover might make them, you know, stand up and listen and take it seriously. And there's also this possible new criminal offence for senior managers introduced as a deferred power if needed, so that the CEO of these companies, CEO or whatever, could be personally held liable, which maybe need to be implemented. COVID-19, I should touch on that before I finish, that, you know, in some ways social media has been a bit of a lifesaver for some people during lockdown. They have been able to stay in touch with friends when they've had to socially isolate. So there's definite positives there as well. And there has been an anecdotal decrease in cyberbullying amongst young people during the COVID pandemic. So that's interesting. There's a lot of research going on into that sort of area, the effect of the COVID pandemic on young people's mental health. So maybe one can be optimistic that there may be more focus on positive aspects of social media going forwards, but we really do need to be aware of the worrying aspects that I've been talking about. Big White Wall, you can Google that. That's a very positive site in the UK that offers support and counselling for young people. So there's lots of sites like this. Good Thinking UK is another one. Where there's positive support online for young people with mental health difficulties. This is a study from the Lancet in August 2019, which talks about sleep being perhaps the mediator of some of the negative effects of social media. Teenagers need plenty of sleep, and it could be that, you know, the social media is preventing them sleeping, and that could be influencing their mental health. And cyberbullying is an important factor. And also young people who spend too much time on their screens are not doing physical activity, which is problematic. So there's potentially an increase in things like obesity, physical health difficulties. This has been particularly demonstrated for girls. There's a lot of information and online resources out there that you can see. These are some good sites that you can check out. We have tech support services in the UK, 24/7 tech support for people who are in crisis to seek help. And just to conclude, I think it's worth saying that, you know, the genie is out of the bottle. We can't put it back into the bottle. We can't turn the clock back 10, 15 years. Social media is here to stay. So we as adults need to understand the seriousness of some of the internet content that's out there and what young people may be exposed to. We need to inform ourselves, we need to educate, we need to discuss openly, we need to have appropriate boundaries for social media, for example, no phones in the bedroom at night, as I already suggested. And we know that mental health can definitely be harmed, but there can also be helpful aspects. So perhaps let's not vilify social media generally or the internet. Let's focus on the message rather than the medium. And we need to be using these social media sites and the internet in a more helpful way. And we need to be, you know, reducing the harms that are out there in the way that I've suggested. And of course, it can be good to disconnect, to connect sometimes. You know, face-to-face contact with friends and family is very positive for your mental health usually. This is just a little cartoon to end with. The drawbacks perhaps of behavioural approaches, but it's a light-hearted cartoon. Anyway, thank you Thank you for listening.